You're listening to Feathers, a podcast of stories of women walking in faith. I hope these stories inspire you and encourage you to take flight in your own faith. I'm your host, Amy Bennett, and this is Season 8, Episode 5. Feathers is an outreach of Abiding Ministries. Find more encouragement at abidingministries.net. Well, hey friend, and welcome to Feathers this week. Before we get started, first, I want to just say thank you to the people that responded to last week's episode with Casey Enriquez. For those that have listened, Casey has an amazing testimony of transformation from an addiction, and she now runs a ministry to help other women with similar stories. And at the end of our conversation, I just really felt led to open up an Amazon wish list for her ministry and have us all come together to help supply some of the things that they need. And actually, as I'm recording this, I just got a text from her saying she just received her first shipment, and we were both so excited. All the praise hands in the text messages. So to those out there that responded, thank you so much. She does still have some items left, so it is definitely not too late to join in. You can get to the list from social media posts. We're on Facebook and Instagram under Abiding Ministries, or go just directly to our site, abidingministries.net. And there is a blog post there with the show notes and the link there. Okay, so on to this week. I'm so excited about my guest, Trisha Davis. I got to know Trisha and her husband, Justin, many years ago through social media. At the time I got connected to them, they were starting a ministry to help married couples called Refine Us. And since then, they have authored the book Beyond Us and also have since launched a church called Hope City Church, and they adopted 2 little kids. But many of you know that my history includes that I had an emotional affair. It's been 13 years ago now. So as I was recovering from that and writing my ebook, Entangled, they started Refine Us. And at the time, they were just such an encouragement and confirmation to me personally. So today, I am just thrilled to be here and to finally talk to Trisha. And we are talking about their whole entire journey. And we just had a great time talking. And even now, I still appreciate hearing what God has done in their lives. And I'm left so encouraged, and I know you will be too. So without further ado, here is my conversation with Trisha. Hey, Trisha, and welcome to Feathers today.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Oh, I'm so glad to have you here. I would love if we could start out and you would introduce yourself, your family, and what keeps you busy these days.
Sure. My husband and I live on the north side of Indianapolis in Indiana, where it is snowy and cold, and it's okay. It's February. We're getting close to spring. We have 5 kids. My oldest is a junior in college, which is just crazy. I feel like I pop a wrinkle every time I just even speak that out. But he is about to get married in June, which is even crazier. I have a freshman in college, and then I have an 8th grader, which we call him our gentle giant because he's in 8th grade, but he's 6'7". He's huge.
Oh my gosh.
I know, it's so funny. And then this past June, it'll be a year in June, we adopted our littles, Jalen and Janiyah. They just had birthdays. They are 8 and 10.
Okay. Oh my goodness. I don't even know where to start. So I guess we'll just go back to talk about how we got connected. And I don't even know if you know this, but I've actually been connected with you online since it was before 2011. I actually went back in my email to see. So you guys, and you didn't mention this, but you guys run, is it still going? Refine Us, your marriage ministry? Yeah. So I got connected to you guys, I guess through Crosspoint people back in the day when you were just launching Refine Us. I actually went through an emotional affair back, more than a decade ago, almost 15 years ago. And so when I was just kind of in recovery mode from that, you guys came along with your story and Refine Us. And it was just such an encouragement to me and in my marriage. So thank you for that, first of all. But yeah, so I feel like because I feel stalkerish saying I've been watching you for a decade.
No, it always makes me tickled because I'm like, and you still like us because you've seen all the ups and downs over the past several years. So I think that's great. And
no, that's the most beautiful part. All the ups and downs.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
Well, I had to hold back a giggle when you said you had 5 kids because that's just been so fun to watch over the last couple years. So I feel like, almost a decade ago, your boys were, I mean, gosh, what would they have been, like 11?
Yeah.
Your oldest would have been like 11-ish. So I feel like I've watched your family grow up a bit.
Aw, it's just crazy. We think about it in those terms, and now adopting Jalen and Janiyah, we joke having an 8-year-old and a 10-year-old, which is usually normal for people my age. But I had my oldest son at 21, so we've always been the young parents, and now we joke that we really don't know how old we feel anymore because since the kids have come, we feel 10 years older and 10 years younger all at the same time. So it's great.
Yeah, because you got a second wave of kids there. I just can't believe your youngest is 6'7". I saw a picture of him on Instagram, of course, but it's like I knew he was tall, but I didn't know he was that tall.
I know.
My daughter's in 7th grade, so I'm just, she's 5'5", normal kind of height, but wow, taller than his dad, right?
Yeah, well, then maybe you can give me pointers on girls because it's just a completely different life raising all boys. And then my little sassafras that I have in my house now. I mean, she's just all things pink and frilly and fun and likes to help out doing the dishes. It's just the craziest thing.
Yes. Well, I have a friend. It's so funny because I do love all things. I am such a girl mom. So we adopted as well in our story, which is funny. So we adopted a son. So we had opposites. So we had 2 girls and then we adopted our son. So I'm kind of saying like, I need you to tell me all the boy stuff. But I have another friend at church and she has, she has 3 boys. And then she has a 4th that's a little girl. And she is, I guess she just turned 2. And we were doing something with her and we were talking about like dress up dresses, like princess dress up dresses. Yeah. And she was like, she doesn't have one. I'm like, oh my gosh, like stop the press. I need to go buy her a princess dress because every 2-year-old little girl needs a princess dress up dress.
Well, you'll be so proud of me because the story of our adoption was very quick. Literally last year, within a 3-week period, I did not think my life could change more. My oldest got engaged on a Saturday. Then the following week, my next son in line he graduated from high school. And then a week later, our littles came to live with us. And so we were a little crazy head when we got them just from all that had taken place. And so our first shopping trip together, we split up and Justin took Jalen and I took Janiyah. And it was like Janiyah and I had this bonding moment in, I want to say, maybe it was JCPenney's or I don't know, somewhere in the mall, one of the bigger stores. We come around the corner and there's all of this like Disney princess stuff. And we look at each other like we had never seen it before and just go running and just shop. It was just everything this mom has dreamed of having a little girl. It was so much fun.
How much fun is that you guys get to do that together for the first time? That is so fun.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I love that. Well, I'm excited for everybody to hear because not everybody knows you guys' whole story and why this is so much fun. And oh my goodness. So I want everybody to kind of just, walk through what you guys have been through, what I've seen, on my end as I'm stalkerish. I'm just kidding. No, it's just, I think you would describe it somewhere that it was just really like beauty from ashes. And I feel like that's totally what it's been. So I would love for you just to really start back. I don't know, what has it been a decade ago, what you and your husband have been through and kind of how it's progressed.
Yeah, so we met in college at a little Bible college in the middle of Illinois and took a pretty typical route of people that go to Bible college. I grew up in the south side of Chicago, about 45 minutes south of the city in a city called Joliet. So I didn't grow up in a pastor family or ministry minded at all and really didn't have that, dream birthed in me until I went to college. And so it's where I met Justin and we found love. And so we got married in 95 and right out of the gate started in youth ministry. I spent about 7 years in youth ministry and then decided to plant our first church. And we were so young. We had 2 little boys with one on the way. really had no idea what we were doing, just had this faith and this audacious dream to plant a church on the north side of Indianapolis. And so we did, and people came. It was crazy. We just joke, like, our first time having a gathering, 12 people showed up, and it was summer. And, you know, when you're a church planner, you're just looking at anything to feel like God is in it. So we're like 12 people, 12 disciples. This is amazing, you know, and God would take that little group of 12, and over the next 3 years, we would just grow like crazy. And it seriously was like living out the book of Acts, you know, the story of the first church and how people just gave and they came. It wasn't people coming from the church across the street because they didn't like the music or they didn't like the pastor's teaching. It was people who hadn't come to church before ever without a faith, or people who hadn't been in church in a long, long time. And that little band of 12 grew to over 800 people in 3 years. And man, from the outside looking out or looking in, we looked like the poster children. You know, we had this successful church and a healthy church family that we loved. And now we had 3 little boys. But I don't think people realized, I don't think a lot of us don't realize how much of the veneer we can put on when we step into the walls in the church. Like, it should be the place where you're most authentic and most vulnerable. But like most people, you just get to a place where you feel like you need to be what others need you to be rather than being true to who you are and the place you really are at. And that was Justin and I. We became awesome ministry partners, but we were awful marriage partners. And so we would give our best to the people at church. I would give my best to my littles at home. And then when we were together, it was just not good. We fought, you know, not all the time, just when we were together, you know. No, I'm just joking. It wasn't that bad, but it was just a slow drift of things that used to be something that would bring us together were now on each other's nerves. And then it went from being on each other's nerves to super frustrated with each other. And we went from like fighting for each other, for our dreams and starting this church and raising a family, to fighting against each other. And then we just got to a place that we stopped fighting. Yeah.
So you guys were just kind of living together and not happily.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't think we realized how unhappy we were. And when you get to a place in your marriage where you stop fighting for each other, the grass always looks greener on the other side. And it was our 10-year anniversary. I knew that we were not good. And so we do what I think all of us do. We get to this place where we look for, I don't know, just kind of grasping at straws. When we realize, usually like the first 5 years of your marriage, you realize you can't change each other. And so then you start thinking these thoughts like, well, our marriage would be better if we got out of this apartment and got into a house, or our marriage would be better if we could finally get pregnant, and then you get the house and you get the kids, and it brings you together for a small period of time. But then over time, those things that brought you together start to lose their luster, and they become the very things that start to break you apart. And so 10 years in, we just got to a place that we were just done. And so we did what I believe most couples do. We just looked to the next milestone, the next achievement. And so 10 years anniversary, we decided to go on a cruise and just try and make up for lost time. And we did. It was actually so fun. I believe, like, as you get to know me, I love me some ocean water. Like, put me on a beach and I am good. And so it was a great week. The problem was when that anniversary trip ended and we came back home, we stepped right back into the same life and the same pattern, and our life just went into a downward spiral. And so 10 years into ministry, 10 years into marriage, on October 9th, 2005, my husband had preached a sermon at our church, and I had been a part of leading worship that morning. So we came home at a typical Sunday afternoon, and I was taking a nap, and he came in and just said, "We need to talk." And I said, "Okay." And he just said, I'm done." And I was kind of like, "You're done with what?" With a very cold, non-emotional look on his face, one that I have never seen up to that point. He just said, I'm done with you. I don't
Mm.
I don't want to be in ministry anymore. I don't even know if I want to be in a relationship with God, but I definitely know I don't want to be in a relationship with you. I'm having an affair. It's with your best friend, and I want out.
Devastation. Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
That has to feel like you're sitting in the room with a stranger.
very much so. That's a great way to put it. Yeah, it just how do you allow that to go from your head to your heart? And so obviously things got really tense, and I left and went to my friend's house, and immediately the elders had called Justin and tried to talk him off this ledge that he was about to jump. And he was just in a really dark place. He was not broken. And we were separated for 2 months. And in that first half, God just began to break him. And a lot of people, grace is very confusing, and so is forgiveness. I think when you are wounded by someone else's choices, grace oftentimes gets confused, and forgiveness oftentimes gets confused with it making kind of the aftermath null and void. Like there were still consequences that we were going to have to face because of his choices. But I had to choose if I was going to continue to be a bitter, unforgiving person, regardless of what happened to my marriage. And so we both started going to counseling separately. And my husband, I mean, he'll tell you his first counseling session, he sat down and basically told the counselor as much as I've told you. And she just said, "What do you want out of this counseling session?" And he just said, "I just want to know how God will bless my life no matter who I choose." And her
That's
response,
a strange question.
yeah. And she just said to him, I can help broken people. I can't help hard-hearted people.
Mm.
And that really
Mm-hmm.
was the beginning of Justin starting to break. In fact, I remember this was probably 2 days after everything happened, my mom handing me the phone to a counselor from Focus on the Family. And I remember just like bartering, right, with this counselor just to tell me what to do to have him come back home. And he just said, "If you really love your husband, you'll let him go." Now, this is when like Southside Chicago Trisha came out. I'm not really sure I said anything appropriate with my words, but I just was like, "You are the worst counselor ever." I'm like, why would you tell me to let go of my husband? And what he said in response changed my life forever. He said, "Until you let go of Justin being your God, and until you let go of Justin using you as an scapegoat, until you let go of him, you will always use each other in that way." And it was that moment that I went and packed up all of his clothes. And I tell people all the time, it was like a funeral, but it was worse than death because Justin was alive and well. He just didn't want to be with me. And so that moment of breaking for us and him seeing his clothes being out of his house and me realizing I couldn't depend on him for all of my issues really began where we became ashes and got to a place where then the Lord could turn them into beauty.
Wow. That is, oh my goodness. That I could just feel the weight of that. And I've heard people describe that too, that it's worse than death because they're still alive. Like it's you can't have the same relationship as before.
Right.
But they're still there.
Right. And that began. Go ahead.
No, I was just thinking that, I mean, I just can't imagine the grief at that point.
Yeah.
But that's just what I'm thinking about, just having to grieve, that relationship, that everything really.
Right. It was the slow grieving of so many different areas of my life, grieving the loss of my marriage, the loss of my best friend, and not just a best friend, but that friend that you go through that. I think those friends that you go through the season of having babies together or adopting babies or getting married to, around the same time. It's just a really sweet time of friendship. So not only grieving her, but grieving the death of that life that we lived together, grieving the loss of my church family. But I think for me, the hardest out of all of that grief was grieving the loss of the only identity I had known as an adult. And I was Justin's wife, the pastor's wife.
Right.
And so that began, like you said, grief upon grief, where you just hit such rock bottom. The pit is so deep, you just go, I don't even know where to go from here. And what I've learned from my story and what I've learned over and over again is that rock bottom is still solid surface to begin to stand. And that's what I did. I stood by my kids. I stood close to God. And in that, through counseling, and because my husband was becoming broken, eventually got to stand next to Justin.
Yeah, and if you guys have a book, actually, we haven't even mentioned that, Beyond Ordinary, where you guys talked about some of this. If I remember correctly, didn't you guys get to a point where Justin was trying to reconcile with you and you were wanting to give him more time? Am I remembering that right?
We had started going to counseling, and we joke all the time that we basically went to counseling every day. Like, we did a year's worth of counseling in 2 months. And in the first month, we were going every day, and trust was being rebuilt. And about a month in, our counselor sat down with us, and just like the first thing out of his mouth, he said, Justin, Trisha is starting to trust you again. Trust is being built. If there is anything that you have left out from the affair, now's the time to tell. And so he did. He shared a detail that at that moment I felt like he conveniently, left out. And I think we were all shocked. The counselor was shocked. I was shocked. Justin was shocked at my response, and I lost it. I was done. That was the nail in the coffin. You have gone a whole month in counseling appointments, and are you kidding me? You tell me that now. And so I left him at the counselor's office. And, people talk about all the time, how do you know somebody's broken? And it really is twofold. One, brokenness is a posture. It's someone having a posture that says whatever it takes. Not that you are allowed to like run that person over, but a posture of, I will do whatever necessary to get myself healthy and whole. And then secondly, the Bible says that God's not given us a spirit of fear, but a spirit of power, self-discipline, a sound mind. And there was always something in my relationship with Justin that felt off. Like I couldn't figure it out. It was like this heavy, dark cloud that at some point I felt like it must be me. I must be doing something wrong. And in that counseling session, when Justin confessed that, quote unquote, last piece, I knew he still wasn't being truthful, and I was done. I left that counseling appointment and called my mentor, Joan, and said, I'm filing for divorce on Monday. I've tried. He can't be a person of truth, and I can't do this anymore. I can't feel crazy anymore. So Monday came, and Justin took the boys to school. He picked them up and took them to school, and he showed up back at the house, and I felt like the Lord said, let him in. And I don't know about you, but it was like that warring with God where he's clearly prompting you and you're like, nah, like I think you may have gotten this wrong. And so I opened the door and I let him in, and he just was sobbing. And we sat on the couch, and for the first time in his life, he became truthful with God, truthful with himself, and truthful with me. And he shared that he had been sexually abused as a kid and had never confessed that to anybody, had never shared it with anybody.
Mm.
that he had a 10-year pornography addiction, and the guilt and shame of standing up, preaching to people about why not to engage in pornography and counseling couples. Like, all of this came out. And for the first time ever, I call it the garden moment. Like, Genesis chapter 2 lays out kind of biblically understanding the role of marriage. And in Genesis chapter 2, verse 25, it says, both Adam and his wife were naked and neither of them felt shame. Like, God's vision for us as married couples is to be fully known emotionally, spiritually, physically. And we could never emotionally and physically and spiritually connect because he lived under such darkness. And so for the first time with that confession, it was like we were seeing each other as God meant for us to see each other. I knew all of him so I could love all of him. And that really began with that confession. Instead of it being wounding, it brought healing, because now I could know the real Justin, my real love, my husband, fully and wholly.
I actually just heard, I love that you just said that, because I just read a quote from Christine Kane this morning that said, God cannot heal what you don't reveal.
Yeah.
We have to bring that stuff out into the light.
Right.
And it sounds so funny to hide something from God and from others. I mean, especially God. Like, God knows everything, right? Like, how can you hide that? But you can have this, I don't want to deal with that right now. Even though you may know that God knows it, you may be unwilling to deal with it.
Yeah.
So I'm just thinking of people that might be listening. There's might be stuff that's in your past, and in order for you to find true healing, you've got to reveal it to God and really to others. Especially, I'm thinking, like you guys in a marriage relationship.
Right.
You have that vertical relationship, and then we have our horizontal relationships too. That and that doesn't mean you have to like confess that to everybody,
right.
In the world. But for you guys to have healing, that was huge.
Yeah,
that's huge.
In the Bible,
and it's amazing how our past, our childhood. So I'm saying this as in I've been in counseling myself for like the past 6 weeks. Nothing major, just I'm almost 40 this year, so I'm having my midlife. What is going on? And kind of dealing with some of that stuff. But it's amazing how even just seconds of your childhood can affect you for decades.
Yeah, and no one ever really tells you that it will. Even if you've had the best of childhoods, it's so funny. So much we leave out at the altar when we say I do. From things like, hey, P.S. when we fight, we're going to fight like my family fights. Like, we don't have those conversations, and we oftentimes do marriage counseling for the future, but rarely do we go back in the past.
Yeah, and it's so hard. I mean, that's definitely it's definitely hard to figure that out unless you've been. It's until you've done it, right?
Right.
If somebody would have sat and told me, we'll be married 20 years this year, that how your family fought and how your family fought and communicated would affect you, and this is how I don't think I could have comprehended it.
Right.
I think I had to live 20 years to see how that played out.
Yeah.
And I don't mean to not give people hope, but it does. I think it does affect it. But
on a side note, for those listening who may be turning 40, a book that completely just changed my heart and life when I turned 40 is a book called 40/40 Vision, Clarifying Your Mission in Midlife. It's a phenomenal book. And anybody who, like you said, going through that tension of 40s, it's another layer. I love, love, love that you just said you're going to counseling, because this drifting that happens in our heart doesn't first start in our marriage. It starts with us individually. And it's not always these big, deep, dark sins. It's just like, I don't know what's going on with me. When my son graduated from high school, nobody told me it would be one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life. I was totally caught off guard. But to watch your kid graduate, it was almost like he's they graduate into the next season of life that doesn't involve you. You go from parenting as a, mothering to mentoring and then completely letting go. Anyway.
Listen, I've got a ninth grader so I'm staring that down in 3 years. So I'm soaking this up.
Get ready. But then you think, oh my gosh, I'm not going to survive this, because you don't know what's for the future. And then it unfolds and you see your kids become these beautiful adults, and you grieve it and you accept it, and then you get to see just this beautiful thing unfold. So, and that kind of goes back to Jess and I's story. Like, we had spent 10 years trying to have the best marriage that he and I could put together. And the marriage we have now is the best marriage that God can put together. And it began with layers and layers of forgiveness and grace and hard conversations and lots and lots and lots of biblical counseling.
I love that you said that. I think it's such a good takeaway for people listening is just the turning point for you guys was bringing really everything out into the light.
Right.
Like true confession. And then also getting help.
Yes.
And I think, even after all this time, for me, just personal testimony as far as counseling is going, I kind of felt like, me and God are going to figure this out. If God can't help me, then nobody can help me,
Yeah.
I can do it. I don't need anybody else. I mean, I wasn't being, I don't know, but it was until God told me, like, he said, I'm giving you somebody to help you.
Yeah.
And the counselor was actually a gift from him. And it was still him working. He had just chosen, an instrument, a person, to help that. I think there's some things that are, God gives us, inner healing that is instant and miraculous. But then I think there's sometimes that we just do need to work through, with a counselor.
Yeah. Good. I've been thinking about that lately too, of, the gift of those layers. It's in, and I believe that, like you said, God can instantly heal us, and he does, and he can. But I also believe that the process of healing becomes purpose in the pain. It's where God grows us in our empathy. It's where God grows us as people, that I think to be instantly healed in all of it, we would miss out on the richness of the lessons learned along the way. Wouldn't you agree?
Totally. I would totally agree. I think it's opened my eyes, not only to my own life, but other people's lives. Yeah. And I think, just every single time I go, I feel like I grow a little bit more. And if I were to look back and I would have, God had given me the choice, knowing what I know now, I would have gone through the process. I wouldn't have asked for immediate healing. I would want to have walked through it.
That's beautiful, Amy.
So sidetrack, pro counseling here.
I know, right? Well, and people are like, okay, so why did she write a book on marriage? Because she pretty much has a marriage I do not want to have. So
no, yeah. So how did we move on from there?
Well, we got out of ministry, and for, I think, the first 2 years of our restoration, if our counselor were to say, show up on a Wednesday wearing green clothes and stand on your left leg, we'd be like, we got you, just whatever he said. And he felt like the best thing for us was to not only be out of ministry, but to move from the city we planted our church, to give the church a chance to heal and recoup, and for us. And so we did. And my husband became an executive recruiter, recruiting commercial lenders and placing them in banks. And it was awesome. It was like he made great money. We weren't responsible for anybody. Like, his boss could care less who I was, or actually his boss was very gracious and wonderful to me, but like, his job wasn't a part of our family. It was his job. And so he did really well. We ended up going on our first President Club trip, which, if you don't know what that is, it means like if you just do really good at your job, you get to go on a paid vacation with your company. And Jessica and I were like 5-year-olds. We were freaking out. We went to the Grand Cayman Islands, and all of these people have been well-versed in all that goes down, and we had no idea. And So I'll never forget us. This is probably about 3 years into our restoration. I'm sitting on a beach with Justin, just years of counseling, years of feeling like healing, but I still felt like not only did Justin damage my marriage, but that the church was another mistress. Like there was the actual mistress, and then there was the other mistress, the church. And I remember looking at Justin on the beach and sipping on our tea, and I like said, cheers to never going back into ministry again. He's like, like, because it doesn't matter if 5,000 people come to your church, you're not going to win a trip to the Grand Cayman Islands. And so fast forward that year, we had a local church senior pastor reach out to us. It's a pretty large church at the time. It still is. It's about twice the size now. And I just remember the pastor asking us over coffee if Justin and I would share our story at his church. And I was like, oh my gosh, Aaron, absolutely not. Like totally shut him down. And then he played the pastor card on me. He's like, well, why don't you pray about it? I was like, listen, I was in ministry for 10 years. I totally know this pastor card. The answer is no. And for the next 2 months, it was like just wrestling with the Lord, just kept wrestling and wrestling. And it was like he kept speaking into me the parable of the talents, that he'd given us this redemption story. And I need to make a choice if I was going to bury it or if I was going to do something with it. And so I called him and said, I'm willing to do it. I'm just going to do it this one time. And so we did. We shared our story through tears. It was like an interview style. And then after the third service, people just stayed. They stayed and they waited in line to talk to us. And there was no book. There was no platform. There was no social media, anything. It was just the messed up Davises sharing their testimony, and people stayed and they wanted to know how. Like, how did I forgive? How did we heal? And I was like, I don't know, like God just did. And so it was like this challenge that really birthed Refine Us Ministries to begin to, what our counselor told us, you can't heal a wound you don't give a name to. And so our mission became giving the wounds we find in our marriage relationships names so that we can start naming it, we can start grieving it, and eventually find healing in it. And that's been our ministry since 2009.
And that's Refine Us.
Yes. Yeah. And we started out as a blog. It's really probably turned more into us partnering with conferences and churches where we go into their church community and really speak on this topic in a really in-depth layer, and in hopes that it becomes a launching pad for that community to start a movement of healthy marriages. And really at the heart for us is beginning it with the idea of being fully known and fully loved. And so we just talk about, what does it mean to be a person of truth? And what does it mean to forgive and show grace and have a healthy marriage?
Yeah, I'm wondering about that. Having a healthy marriage. So you guys got to the point where, the truth was hidden. There was consequences on his side from that. We get into all sorts of things when, we don't live in our truth. But I just wonder, for people who maybe their marriages aren't bad, there's no infidelity. Like, what have you seen? You guys have been ministering now for, goodness, I don't know, how many years is that? Like 8 years, 9 years?
Yeah, since then, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I just wonder what you guys have seen. Have you guys seen some common pitfalls that marriages, fall into, that you could just give us a couple quick, marriage tips?
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. Our first 10 years of marriage compared to our second 10 are so different. And not only because we're different, but just the social media has changed relationships. It's changed trying to compare yourself with the Smiths. And oftentimes I see younger generation of couples trying to be the couples that they're seeing on the Instagram photo, rather than real life. And so, if you're listening and you just feel like you have a good marriage, but you always feel like you could be doing better, or there's something that you're not doing or you're missing out in, can I just tell you that the gift of marriage and what I've learned to love about it, especially women ask me all the time, how do you heal and how do you not fear that your husband will do it again? And that I don't know. Nobody has a guarantee in that. But I will say, when you ask someone who struggles with addiction, whether it be porn or it be food or it be drug, whether it be addiction, and we don't even have a term for it, where you're just constantly trying to live the Pinterest life or look like the couple that you see in the magazine or on social media, it always leaves that person at a place where they feel shame, that they want to hide. Like it doesn't bring life. But a marriage that securely, when as a woman, as a wife, when you see yourself in this role, how God called you to see it, when you fully love your husband, when you expose all your heart to him, what changes is that you then allow your husband to be fully known and fully loved. And it outshines everything else. Like your kids, the coworker, the church, the pastor, nobody will ever know your husband emotionally and spiritually and physically like you do. And what I see over time is that we have kind of confused the marriage relationship. We'll talk about the emotional side and the spiritual side, but we don't talk about the physical aspect of marriage relationships. Yet it's usually, the top two reasons people divorce is infidelity and finances. So I think, to come back to your question, the advice I would give you is kind of twofold. And it's not 5 happy hops, which is going to make you all mad at me. Because if I knew the 5 happy hops, girl, I'd have a book called 5 Happy Hops to a Healthy Marriage. It just doesn't exist. I would say, be vulnerable in knowing that you cannot change your husband. Only God can change his heart. And the best prayer that you can change to change your marriage, or to keep your marriage healthy and vibrant, is to pray the prayer, God, change me. Because seasons change.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and absolutely. I mean, this is, I had mentioned we had gone through an emotional affair and it was on my end. And the thing for us healing, one is admitting, well, just like you're talking about, just admitting and confessing what happened. Mm-hmm. But 2, it was really about me. Like I would have said at the moment, like, it's about my husband and he's not, doing this or that, or he doesn't, whatever the list was that he wasn't doing. But really the issue was me and God. And I wasn't, there was a lot of issues. There's a lot of issues, of course, but I think the core issue is that I was looking for my husband to fulfill something that God really can only fill.
Yeah, that's so good, Amy. That's like, yes. Put that on a poster somewhere. That's just good.
Yeah. And it really, and somebody asked me the other day, did you guys go to counseling? And obviously I believe in counseling, but we didn't as a couple go to counseling, because really what I realized was the issue was between me and God. And because that wasn't right, then the sin and all the consequences came from that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I love that advice. Also, I love the thing that you talked about was knowing that you can't change your husband. I actually think I had another guest who said, we see something in our husband that we want to change, and we even will pray, like, God, just change that in him. And they said, maybe God is not wanting to do that thing in him right now.
Right.
Maybe he's doing something different.
Right.
And wanting to attack something different, because he has his own little plan, not little plan, big plan of how he wants to grow us.
Yeah. And that's what I would say. Secondly, pursue your husband. And if you look on Amazon under books, you will see this little book that has been in the top 10 for, I think, 10 years now, called The 5 Love Languages. So obviously it's probably a pretty good book. But in it, the premise of the author just talks about how we each have a love language. And I think what happens is even if you don't know that book exists or you don't even know you had a love language, the way you love or how you receive love is oftentimes how you give love. And you can have marriages that are good marriages, but they always kind of feel like they've plateaued because one is trying to love the other with how they feel loved. And I think the best gift you can give to your spouse is really learning what is their love language and then leaning into that. My husband's love language is words of affirmation and in physical touch. Those are my top bottom ones. Mine are acts of service and quality time. So we don't even fit together in any way, shape, or form. But when you start praying the prayer, God change me, and you start leaning into how your spouse feels loved, then it becomes fun in the pursuit. Like as you pursue your husband for how he receives love, I can't quite explain it. It's like a everyday little modern day miracles of how you grow in your love for each other. And then you become that couple you always dreamed you would. Like I am more madly in love with Justin today than the girl that stood at the altar with him. The way that I know his heart, the way that I am in tune to his dreams. And listen, we are not like running through a field of flowers. We fight all the time. We disagree on parenting issues. When you adopt two kids who have lots of trauma, the way he sees it and I see it is sometimes different. So I'm not saying that, but I'm at the core of who we both are. At the end of the day, Justin knows, one, I'm not his enemy, and two, that I believe that he believes the best in me, and that can be a game changer.
And oh my goodness. And I love this because this is definitely something I'm being reminded of. And just the love languages. And I think, it's been out for a decade. Almost everybody has heard of this, I think. Mm-hmm. But you can know your spouse's love language, but that phrase that's used, you can lean into it. It takes such humility and such intentionality to actually do that.
Right.
It just does not come natural because we want to love in the way that we receive love. Right. And I think that is just in itself, it is just a service, an act of love to our spouses. And I'm preaching to myself because my husband is physical touch and I'm words of affirmation. So, and acts of service. So I'm running around, trying to do things. I'm like, don't you see I love you? I'm cooking dinner. I'm doing laundry. And he just wants you like, would you just come over and sit and hold my hand,
Yes.
And it's so hard. It's so hard to remember that and to actually do that.
Yeah. And then that's what becomes fun over time, that when you do start to lean into it, it just becomes more organic and natural than forced. In the first 3 years after our separation, it was totally forced because there were triggers. There were times where, counseling did not go good and the Spirit of the Lord did not feel near. And I was just mad at everybody. I was mad at God, Justin. I mean, just mad at the world. But it's just pushing through those moments and allowing God to heal. But, God can't heal a wound that you don't give over to him. And so I think that we discount these little wounds of feeling how, I'm not talking about the big wounds, little wounds, like when you come home and you've just done all the dishes, right? And for the first time in months, all of the laundry's done. And then your husband walks in and he puts like 3 cups that have been in his car forever and they smell like in the dish sink, and you just feel so disrespected in that moment.
Yes.
It's just a small little moment, but inside you're like, oh my, I'm going to take him out. Like, why wouldn't you see that? It's recapturing those moments that you just see them for what they are and either just ask him to rinse them out or let it go. It's like, but when you are teetering on feeling like you're hiding in your marriage, teetering on never being seen or feeling like you're loved the way you need to be loved, it's those moments that lead to the catastrophic ones.
Oh my goodness. Yes. Okay. So this has been amazing, but I want to hear a little bit how your adoption has come to be, and I know we could take another hour to talk about that, but maybe you could just give us, so we fast forward, you guys decide to adopt, and you guys have launched a new church. I don't know if you could give us, in our time left, how in the world that came to be.
Yeah, well, it's just been crazy. But we lived in Nashville, Tennessee. As you said earlier, my husband was on staff at Crosspoint Church for 6 years, and my boys ended up going to school with Stephen Curtis Chapman's daughters, Stephen and Mary Beth Chapman. And the school was just surrounded by a community of adopted families. And it was just amazing to experience and hear the girls' stories. And it's just very inspiring. And that honestly is all it was at that moment. And then I just found myself around different people. Jamie Ivey, who's another podcaster, got involved in her podcast really early on, like very early on, and her just sharing her story about adoption. And then different friends who had become what are called safe families. So it's kind of the bridge between foster care and a permanent placement. So it's just this whole idea of adoption. And I just felt like God had given me a vision that not only would we adopt, but it would be siblings. It would be a sister and a brother. And I would have dreams about these little brown-skinned people. And again, like talking about hiddenness and, being honest, I didn't tell Justin for a while because we were full-time with Refine Us. We were traveling like crazy. We had 2 kids in high school, basketball. It was just insane. So the thought of adopting children, I was just afraid he'd just fall over in laughter or tears. I didn't know. And so I kind of let the dream die for a while. And then somebody sent me an email that had 2 little boys from Uganda that were up for possible adoption. And that's when I began to share with Justin my heart and pray. And those little boys, it fell through for their adoption to happen. And I just always knew in the back of my mind at some point, God was going to bring me my children. So fast forward to 2015, we moved back to the north side of Indianapolis to start Hope City Church. We just launched a year ago in September. And in the midst of launching, we became friends with a gal who owns an adoption agency. And in fact, her son is my middle schooler's best friend. She owns an adoption agency and she just works with babies. And I just told her, I said, the Lord has given me a vision for older kids, not an infant. She's like, well, those come, that's a very rare for me in my adoption agency, but I'll definitely pray with you. And so a whole year went by. And then last May, we received an email about Jalen and Janiah. They're the oldest of 5. They have 3 little siblings that are 5, 4, and that are girls, and then a little brother who's 2. And they all got adopted by another family that were up for adoption. And we got the email. We had our first phone chat with the adoptive mom on a Monday. We met them on a Saturday. We met them again on the next Saturday, and then they came home to live with us. So 3 weeks from the time we got the email, we got our kiddos.
I totally feel you because ours was the same way. We were in waiting for 2.5 years, and we got notified like July 7th, and then he was living with us by August 7th. I think that's the way it went. Maybe July 15th. So it was like a 4-week deal. So it is a whirlwind. Oh my gosh.
How old is he now?
He's 12.
Okay. And how old was he when you adopted him?
He was 8, but just shy of 9. Like he came to live with us, and then like a month later he turned 9.
Oh, so you so know this.
Yes. I mean, totally feel you. So how has it been? How long has it been now since
It'll be a year in June. So what are we in?
It hasn't been a year for you guys.
No. It's been a beautiful, very hard transition on so many different layers. And it's retested the truths that I believe about God, about being honest where we are as parents, as husband and wife, now having 5 kids literally in 5 different seasons, one getting married, one in the midst of college, one in middle school, my oldest in elementary, or my middle guy in elementary, and then my daughter who's in elementary as well, but she lives as, in this little girl life, and we're trying to prepare Jalen for middle school. So it's been hard. It's the more I fall in love with my kids, the more I grieve their stories. And we have an open adoption with their mom. And the narrative that we knew about them when we adopted has not been true to their narrative. And so as their stories come out of abuse and hardship and pain, and then how that trauma plays out in our family, it's like we've all had to go back to school on how to live and love through all that. And so it's been hard, but it's been equally amazing. Like I can't imagine life without them. Like I can't explain it. It's almost like the day that you give birth to your kids. It wasn't instant. It took time, but over time, there's just a moment that it was just solidified that these are my babies, and I would go to hell and back for them.
Yes. And so this road that we've been on for the last 3 years, that's what finally, I don't want to say broke me to where I needed to go to counseling and really deal with this. It's amazing how it brings up stuff in you.
Yeah.
At least for me. And really parenting kids from a trauma background is different than parenting biological kids. And that's what I'm learning.
Yeah.
And I have lots of podcasts and books I could send you.
Send them my way. Send them my way. I think that too probably is, if you are listening and thinking about adopting, part of both for you as well, Amy, like it happening so quickly, we were not prepared and we were ill-equipped to understand their pain. And so I feel, had we done our homework in a way that we needed to in order to meet them and save them from more trauma, as we, there were moments where my frustration was so ridiculous. It was like me asking my asthmatic son to just start breathing better. Like if you would just try harder, just start breathing better. I mean, to say that is so absurd. And I had to learn really early on that you can't just tell trauma kids to do better, feel better, because now they have this healthy family and a clean bed with sheets and a roof over their head. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah. As much as they're safe, they don't have that felt safety.
Right.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. And I think I was actually thinking about some of the things as I prepared actually for this, to think about for people listening that are thinking about adoption. What are some things that you would do, or I would have told myself, 3-4 years ago. And I think you would agree, based on what you just said, is I would have gotten more training.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if you can really prepare, but I didn't. And it's so weird that I've said this before, but I'm a reader. I'm a huge reader. I read all kinds of books, but I had for some reason refused to read books. I'm like, I can figure it out. It'll just be our story. And, God will help us through and all this. And I really wish I would have done a lot more reading. I wish I've talked to a lot more parents. I don't know if anything can truly prepare you for it, but I wish I would have done some more, because we didn't do a private adoption. We went through South Carolina DSS.
Okay.
And they gave us a little bit of training, but I think it was all like worst case scenarios. Like, what if they are, like burning your house down? And what I have found is that's not the hard stuff. The hard stuff is like making breakfast.
Right. Yeah.
and routines and just living life that maybe when they're from a traumatic background, they don't know how to do.
Yeah.
And that was shocking for me and really hard to figure out. How do you work through that?
Yes. I mean, you just nailed it. And then, you're much further along in this journey than we are. And so it's like when you bring your newborn home and you don't understand what their cries mean, and you just freak out. And then you have, your mother walk in the door and she's just like, oh, he's blah, blah, blah. And you're like, what? Like, how do you know that? And it just, when you're a mom and you start to learn those different cries, it becomes instinctive. And I think I'm starting to finally understand my sweet kids' cries and finally meeting them where they need to be met at, not where I think they should be, and showing grace to each other and seeing the joy and the laughter come out of them. That people say, would you do it again if you had the choice? I'm like, oh my gosh, 110%. 110%. I just would have chosen to prepare, like you said, a little bit more wiser to understand that they even had cries to begin with. And that's where I'm like you. I completely, 100% missed the mark. But I have this vision that God is going to, their mom enrolled in college. And I can't imagine how hard this year has been for her to go from 5 kids to none. She has, had a rough road and has been in and out of just homeless shelters. And it's just been rough. And part of her story too, she has a story and hasn't had anybody in her life, and, choices caught up with her. But I have this vision of my kids and I being at her graduation and it just being this holy moment. I don't know if it's going to happen, but what I do know is that it doesn't matter who you are, whether you're adopted or biological, we all have a longing for that mother in our life. And I feel like my job is to do my best to guard them, to have the best and healthy relationship with their mom that they possibly can. And if God can do, beauty from ashes with my story, who am I to keep God from allowing beauty from ashes to come from theirs?
That gives me chills. We have a closed adoption, so yeah. But I'm going to pray with you guys that you guys have that with her. That it would be so beautiful and powerful, really, for your children and for you guys. But I hate to do it, but we have to wrap up. And oh my goodness, I've enjoyed this so much and being able to talk to you. And we didn't even get into you guys launching your church and stuff from that. But for people that are near you, it's Hope City Church, right?
Yes, Hope City. I think our website's hopecityindy.cc, and our story's on there. You can kind of read how it all came to be. And if you're in the Indianapolis area or just passing through, come on and see us. We'd love to meet you.
Yeah. And you guys have Refine Us. That's refineus.org, right?
Yes, ma'am. And our book is called Beyond Ordinary: When a Good Marriage Isn't Good Enough.
Yes. And it's so good. Like I said, you guys have been such an inspiration to me and my family. And it's kind of cool how our stories have, I don't know, been similar in some ways, but just keep doing what you're doing. You've been such an encouragement, and I know to people listening today. So I appreciate you guys being willing to be vulnerable and open with your story. And I appreciate you being here today.
Awesome. Thank you for having me.
Well, guys, I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Trisha. As you can hear, Trisha has so much good stuff to share. When I think of Trisha's story and look at it with, that 2020 vision with what God has done with her life and her family's life, the one word I take away from that is hope. There is hope in whatever situation you are in. Trisha's husband experienced abuse, addiction, adultery, and it affected his life and his wife's life and his family's life, and it really should have ruined him and his marriage and family. And yet, here we have these two people that surrender their past to God and are willing to be vulnerable with God and with each other. And God heals those wounds and then makes something absolutely beautiful again, not just with their marriage and their sons, but then with their adoption and the church plant. I mean, can't you just see how the enemy would have wanted to stop all of that and really did everything in his power to do that? And yet with God, they were able to overcome and find healing. And I just hope that speaks to whatever situation that you are going through. There is hope with Christ. All right, guys, I think that will do it for this week. I want to remind you this week that you can sign up on our email list. I actually send out a personal email each week to remind you of the latest podcast episode, and you get to be the first to know about any new things coming up. And you can go to abidingministries.net/blog, and there will be a form there on the sidebar for you to sign up. So I appreciate you guys so much for taking the time to listen this week, and we'll see you next week on Feathers.